What have you seen in the southeast? How much have properties gone up in value over the last year? What the properties you're looking at?
Late 2024, we were putting people relatively comfortably into, your Clyde Norths, those sorts of areas, and the same blocks of land comparable now, I would say somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 more.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
That's a big jump.
in that space of time.
Yeah, and that's just for the block of land.
Correct. Yes.
Welcome back to the First Home Foundations podcast. My guest today is none other than Jonathan Hind. So John works for us in our Melbourne office, is one of our consultants. For the listeners, Hindy, what do you do for First Home Specialists?
I take clients through every part of our process, from initial contact through to them walking through the front door of their own home for the very first time. Hopefully offering them some guidance and support along the way, and really trying to help them to navigate what can be quite a complex process when they're looking at it from the outside.
Yeah, now you've been in this industry for quite a while now. For the listeners, Hindy and I, we've known each other for what, 10 years?
Yeah, best part of a decade.
Yeah, God, how unfortunate for you. So yeah, you've been in this industry for quite a while. I think you went out, then you came back. Tell me a little bit about it. What have you done?
Yeah, so in the property industry for a little over 10 years. A lot of the early years was helping people and clients to build good quality, successful investment property portfolios, so operating in that world. And then more recently working with yourself, as I said, helping clients and guiding them through the process of achieving their goals and their dream of home ownership. Which, as I said, it can look complicated from the outside looking in, and it is, but we try and break it down into simple segments for them, simple steps, and before they know it, they're walking through the front door of their own home.
So I guess first of all, what are the changes that you've seen in the property industry, the property market over those 10 years?
Blimey, it's an interesting question. People say that you're going to see these ebbs and flows to the market, and that cycles are going to repeat themselves, and we're going to go through quiet periods, then really busy periods where there's a massive shortage of available land, available stock. And you come into it kind of thinking, okay, is that just us saying something that we think is going to repeat itself? But then time after time, even in that sort of 10, 11-year period, I've seen the same cycles, whether it's in Queensland, whether it's here in Victoria, where the market's quiet and then the market goes nuts and suddenly it's a scramble to try and find available land and stock. And yeah, the cycle repeats itself.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've observed the cyclical nature. So you're predominantly working in Melbourne at the moment, is that?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So what are you seeing as far as that cycle in Melbourne at the moment?
We're definitely entering the very high demand and entering a period of shorter supply. And when that happens, the available land gets sucked up. And when we say available land, we're particularly talking about titled and registered land that is ready for people to build on.
For people who don't know, what does registered land mean?
It just means that it is at a point where once we get their finance approved, we can then get the builders onto site really quickly and start the build process. Whereas an untitled or an unregistered block means there's still lots of work to be done in that particular development. Civil works haven't been finished, etc. And it means that if we put a client onto a block like that, we're not going to be able to execute the build for them until that land is registered or titled.
Yeah, so with developments, basically what a developer does is they take a paddock and they turn that paddock into a block of land that you're able to buy. Typically that process will take somewhere between 3 to 5 years to happen. So when you're buying untitled land, you are buying that land when that paddock is either still a paddock or is a construction site where, they're doing the civil works, they're getting the roads in, etc. When you buy a registered block, everything is done. So all the roads are in, the services are in, and that block of land is ready to be transferred into your name and you can begin building on it straight away. So what we see in a regular market is you will have a mixture of titled and untitled land available. And if we're looking in the Victorian market, probably post-COVID to now, we've kind of seen that balanced market where there's been some titled land, some untitled land. Prices for the better part have been reasonably stable. I mean, there's been a bit of uplift, but nothing huge. Certainly nothing compared to Melbourne boom times or what you're seeing in Queensland at the moment. And then what happens when a market begins to move is, so if it takes a developer 3 to 5 years to bring a block out of the ground, the big developers in particular, so, you know, your Stocklands, people like that, they're predicting forward what land they're going to need. And they do that based on what they think market demand is going to be. So then we'll have some changes in the marketplace. So the big change that we're seeing at the moment is the Help to Buy scheme. So the Help to Buy scheme has meant that a whole heap of people who couldn't buy property now all of a sudden can buy property. So a whole heap more demand is coming into the market from first home buyers. But surprisingly, perhaps to first home buyers, it's not just them that incentive stimulates. It also stimulates investor buyers, because investors know that first home buyers are all going to be trying to get into the market, and they go, rightio, there might be a bit of money to be made here. So we actually saw investors move first in Melbourne before the first home buyers started moving. But the point of the story is you get a whole heap of demand that wasn't there before. So demand spikes. People buy up the titled blocks first, and then what happens is you've got a whole heap of untitled land on the market, and this leads to a scarcity of land in the marketplace. So there's more buyers than what there is land, and when demand outstrips supply, prices go up. And that's what you're starting to see in the Victorian market now.
Yep.
So tell me some of the symptoms of that. Like what's happening on the ground? What are you seeing and hearing that's leading you to that conclusion?
Well, firstly, we're into a market where we're finding it harder to find blocks of land as readily as we were. And when I say readily, I don't mean they were falling out of the sky and it was easy before, but within a reasonable time frame, we could find titled and registered blocks in the majority of the areas we were looking for our clients. We started to see it predominantly in the southeast, maybe mid last year, maybe end of quarter 2, quarter 3 last year, where in the areas in the southeast growth corridor, the demand was pushing prices up to the point where it was becoming increasingly difficult to put our clients in there. And that was okay. You know, we moved a little bit further out, which again, we talk a lot about. If you wait, you're almost inevitably going to end up further away from the suburb that you want to be, or on a smaller block, or paying more for the same thing. That same issue we are now seeing, and it's accelerating in the northern growth corridor, the northwest and the west, where it just wasn't as big a concern mid to late last year. So what that's meaning is there's less options for our clients. Those options are increasing in price, and as such, we need to almost have a faster speed of getting them onto a block so that they get what they want before prices push outside of their budget, essentially.
So what have you seen in the southeast? How much have properties gone up in value over the last year? Well, the properties you're looking at.
In the last year, so late 2024, we were putting people relatively comfortably into, you know, your Clyde Norths, those sorts of areas, and the same blocks of land comparable now, I would say somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 more.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
that's a big jump
in that space of time.
Yeah, and that's just for the block of land.
Correct. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and then the way the Melbourne property market works is the southeast is kind of the canary in the coal mine. Okay. So the southeast tends to get the price movement first, and then it moves around the bay. So it goes from the southeast to the north and then the west. And I think that kind of lines up with what you're saying, where the southeast was starting to pop off about a year ago, and now we're beginning to see that in the north and the west now. So if you've already seen that jump in the Southeast corridor, you can expect the same thing, if not more, to be honest, in the North or the West, because you're beginning at a lower base than what you were in the Southeast. So tell me, John, how is working through a company like us different to a client going, say, direct to a builder, a bank, a land developer? Why would they choose to go through us?
There's probably two different answers to that. Number one is the protection side of things. We do this day in, day out, week in, week out, year on year, and we've done it for personally hundreds of clients, but I'm presuming thousands across the business. So over time, we've learned some of the pitfalls and some of the hurdles that you have when you're dealing directly with developers or directly with builders. And our job in many ways is to safeguard our clients from falling into those pitfalls. A very good example of that would be trying where possible, and the market is definitely shifting in this regard, but where possible, putting finance clauses in so that we can make sure there's no risk to the client of them losing a deposit. Or if we are going to be doing unconditional contracts, which as the shortage and the scarcity increases, making sure we've done thorough preparation so that we're not, like often clients will do themselves, put in a loan application without doing their credit checks, without properly assessing or having their borrowing capacity and their servicing assessed, meaning that there's a high probability of that application being rejected. So if we can do the preparation work up front, we're taking that risk element out for the client, meaning that they're not exposed, they're not going to lose their deposit that they've spent years trying to save up. So there's that element. And so protection is one part of it. And the second, I guess, part to the answer would be guidance and mentoring. So personally, I'm a homeowner now and a property investor, but I tried in the beginning myself and my wife tried to invest in property without guidance and mentorship, and we bought apartments. And so for the best part of 2 decades, we owned apartments that just didn't give us any great return, no capital growth. That was before I worked within the industry, before I knew that it's the land that you want, et cetera, et cetera. So as I said, 2 parts of the answer. One is the protection and knowing how to navigate, and I use that word quite a lot, navigate the process from start to finish, avoiding the pitfalls. And the other is having that mentoring, for want of a better word, where people are helping us to avoid mistakes that can be avoided with good guidance.
So that term unconditional contract, for people who've never heard that before, what does that mean?
So an unconditional contract is essentially where you, in this case, going onto a block of land, because the contract's relative to the land, and immediately the assumption is that that is going to settle and you're going to own that block of land. And if anything goes wrong between you signing that land contract and it's settling, and by going wrong, I mean something during the finance process doesn't work and you can't get your finance approved. If it's an unconditional contract, the developer, in this case, is within their rights to take and keep any deposit you've put down. And when you deal directly with developers, that can be an initial $10,000, or it could be 5% of the value of the land, which can be somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000, which is a significant amount of money to outlay without protecting yourself against potential loss of it.
Yeah. So for that type of situation where you had no option but to sign an unconditional contract, just to clarify, when you sign a land contract, you can sign it unconditional, in which case you are obligated to buy that. There's no conditions on the contract, hence unconditional. Or the other option is that you can purchase with a finance clause, which would be a condition. And a finance clause says, hey, we want to buy this property. We're happy to pay a deposit. However, we need to get a loan in order to get the property. In the event that we're not able to get the loan, we need to be able to exit the contract free of charge, get our deposit back, is generally how it works. So what happens, particularly in Melbourne, is if you are buying an untitled block, and sometimes even a titled block, they do this as well, the developer may have a requirement that you sign an unconditional contract. They may not accept contracts with conditions. So in the event that a client had to sign an unconditional contract in order to get a block at the right price in the area they wanted to live in, what would you suggest they do to put themselves in the best position to be able to settle on that block?
Preparation. I'd
Yep.
come back to that, which is I would be making sure that there was a strong, fully investigated pre-approval and credit checks done, so that when you're going unconditional, you essentially already know that the conditional is going to turn into an unconditional before you do it.
So where do you find first home buyers get most confused during the process?
Obviously, it depends and varies significantly from client to client. There's no one answer to that. Most confused. I think the conditional versus unconditional contract thing, the thought process that if they have a bank pre-approval, that they're essentially already all the way to being covered for an unconditional. I think clients naturally are inclined to believe that or to think that way. Whereas we've seen it numerous times where, the pre-approval they get given from a bank is chalk and cheese compared with the amount that a bank will actually lend once they take into account all of the different factors, the servicing, the credit history, the land itself and the build that's going to go onto it. So yeah, pre-approvals versus unconditional approvals is definitely part of it. And then again, now going back to navigating the process with developers and builders, the difference between a conditional and unconditional contract, particularly in the developer world, and then with builders themselves, the difference between fixed price full turnkey builds versus a build that may be the shell of a house only and lacking all of the fundamentals that you'd then need on top of that.
So what is a fixed price full turnkey build?
So a fixed price full turnkey build, so the full turnkey bit refers to everything being included in the initial price. So builders will often advertise a house, but potentially it won't include some of the pretty critical elements to a fully completed home, such as landscaping, garden, driveway, etc. And then, also things within the house that you would want for it to be livable. So full turnkey is where everything is included in the initial price. And the fixed price part refers to the fact that the price is fixed, so it cannot change. So in the event that something happens externally and the cost of timber or the cost of labor goes up, for example, the builder is not able to then pass those costs on because you've got a fixed price contract.
So when you're deciding which suburbs or estates that you're going to put clients into, how do you decide what you're going to recommend to them?
I think that process starts early on in terms of where the clients themselves are either currently located or, more importantly, or as importantly, where they would like to be living. Once we know that, we then sort of try to marry that up with what their budget is. If somebody wants to live in a Toorak or an inner city suburb location where buying a block of land, A, is impossible, but B, it would cost millions of dollars, but their budget is $750,000, then we need to work on that. So ideal scenario, we can always get people into whichever suburb they want to be in. The reality is making sure that the affordability of their budget relative to their expectations aligns. So that's important, because otherwise we're going down a path where they're not going to be happy because their expectation isn't aligned with reality, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really important first step, and I mean it's the first step that I put into the book is affordability. So it's a rare circumstance where a first home buyer's dreams match up with their borrowing capacity. So quite often the first conversation that we've got to have with people is, I understand that you want to be here, but this is what your budget allows. And I think in Melbourne in particular, as the market moves, this is going to become more and more prevalent, where things that people could afford 6 months ago are now outside their budget. One of the big issues that I see, particularly in the Queensland market, so the Queensland market has been rocketing along for quite some time now, and where people think is affordable is no longer affordable. And then we hear like the words that kill all first home dreams is, I'll just wait for the market to come back down. But it's not the way it works. So when you're dealing with that affordable end of the market, so the bottom of the pyramid, the best that you can hope for as a first home buyer is for prices to be stable. And I think if you have a look over the last couple of years, with the exception of the southeast in the last year or so, Melbourne prices have been reasonably stable, but I think what you're going to see over the next 6 months to a year is prices are going to begin to rocket up. So it's really important that first home buyers are realistic with their goals and to make sure that what they're going after is achievable and obtainable. Because the reality is, if you keep your dreams outside of your budget, what you end up with is renting for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So what are some of the red flags that you see when you're looking at blocks?
I think that the most common example of that is blocks that are significantly sloping. I'm guilty of it myself. I was trying to find some land for a client last year, and we were looking around Pakenham because that's where they wanted to live. And you jump on and you'd see these blocks that were 700-800 square meters large and get all excited because, it's very difficult to find that size of block. But then, peeling back a layer and going out and looking at these places, they were built on the side of mountains essentially, or large hills. Yeah. So impossible to build on, and therefore very difficult to build on. And therefore, the 700-800 square meters, there's only maybe 100 square meters of it that was buildable, and then expensive. So that's a really common one. Any level of fall, not all blocks are created equal, certainly. And a few of the people I've spoken to in the development world say, look, if you're seeing something that sounds too good to be true, a size of block that just is an outlier compared with everything else in and around that area, then there's a reason for it. There's something that makes it much trickier to work with.
Yeah. And I think it's an important point to make that land isn't land just because, most people look at a block and they're like, a block's a block. But if you've got over a meter of fall, so what fall is, if we go from the highest part of the block to the lowest part of the block, that's what the fall is. And even if it's just a meter, and a meter over a 400 square meter block may not actually seem like that much when you look at it, but a whole heap of additional site works need to go into making that block ready to build on. And that can often cost, $50,000, $100,000 more. So where you think you've got this really cheap block of land, sure, the land's cheap, but now you've got to spend $100,000 more making the block so it's ready to build on. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Probably some of the other things that people can't see with the naked eye is it might be the soil type, for example. So if you've got a poor soil type, the builder has to use different materials. Perhaps they've got to do peering, whatever it is. Again, that can add $50,000 to $100,000 to the build price. Even if the block's fine, sometimes you have estate covenants. So estate covenants are rules that land estates might have for building on the block. So, they might want all of their houses to be made out of brick and cladded, for example. I'm just making stuff up here. But sometimes those covenants, whilst they're great and they make the estate look amazing, again, they can push your build price up by $50,000, which if you're already at the edge of your borrowing capacity, may push it completely out of your price range. Speaking of builds, what are some of the things that people should be looking for when selecting a builder?
It's an interesting question. I think from our perspective and talking repeatedly about protecting clients and helping them navigate navigating this process of getting into a fully completed home, we talk a lot about fixed price, full turnkey, not wanting to put clients in a situation where these additional add-ons and variances can escalate over time, because the cheap price going in that may look very attractive, once you put the add-ons and variances in, can spiral quickly to the point where it is significantly more than the initial price, but also more than, what a fixed price full turnkey would have been. So that's important. And then working with builders, and again, we work with a small select panel of builders for this exact reason, where we know that their timeframes are going to align with what a first home buyer wants. I talk to clients a lot about, do they have any experience with builds? And obviously most of our clients don't, because they're first home buyers, but almost everybody I speak to has a family member, a friend, someone from work who's gone through a build process and it's been a less than positive experience for them. And almost always it falls into one of or more than one of those three categories. The price didn't end up being what I was told going in, or the house wasn't fully completed until we'd paid a lot extra, and that took extra time. And then the third one feeds in from that, which is the build process taking 12, 18 months longer than that. So those are the things that we vet our builders on up front. And when I say we, obviously it's the owners of the business that do this, but it's about making sure that the clients are going to get what they want, which is a fully completed home. They're going to get it at the price that they've agreed to and are comfortable with, and they're going to get it in a time frame that works for them and their family to get into that property, to get them out of renting and or to get them out of living with family, living with in-laws, whatever it may be. And our clients don't want to wait 18 months for that. They want to be in their homes, today in an ideal world, but that's not going to happen. So it's about going, right, how quickly can we get them into a good quality property? And that's the process that we follow. And therefore, those are the red flags or the things I'd be trying to avoid, is the opposite of those things.
So talking about finance for first home buyers, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make that end up causing finance declines?
I mean, certainly the biggest mistake I see is people going off half-cocked, if that's the right expression, with the pre-approval. They've spoken to a bank, they've spoken to a broker, they've had a cursory look at income versus maybe a little bit of debt taken into consideration, and then they're off and running, talking to developers, putting down big deposits. So that's one. And then let's assume that part's going to be okay and they can borrow what they're initially told. Then it's not knowing that something's on their credit file that they were unaware of. Putting in a loan application because they're high income earners or good income earners, they're feeling confident and safe on that side of things, only to find out that something's on their credit file. And I've had clients that you would never believe there's anything wrong with their credit file, and it turns out there is. And equally at the other end, I've had clients that you're thinking, there's something going to be wrong here, and then they've got a really high score. So people don't know until they've done a credit check. And there's different credit check bodies out there, but unless they're using the one that the banks use, which is Equifax, it's not a foolproof credit check that we know is going to sail through that approval process. So lack of preparation or not knowing what they needed to prepare, leading to finance fallovers.
Yeah, so if you're wanting to know what your credit score is, you can obviously come through us. We can get that for you. Or if you wanted to do it on your own, you can go to the Equifax website and get a hold of your credit score directly from them as well. So when we're setting clients up to get their loans approved, what are some of the things that you're going through with them? What are some of the tips and tricks that you can give to people?
Preparation is key, and we talk about that right from the initial point of contact with a client, but also having trusted people around you. So again, I've said it about the builders. It's a small select panel. It's the same with finance. We work with people that we trust, who've got a track record of getting our clients finance approved, and our clients in the vast majority of cases are first home buyers. So there's a nuance to it. There's a making sure that things are done in the correct order with first homeowner grants and waivers and stamp duty concessions, all of these different things that, don't exist for someone on their third property or buying their first investment property. So having a team of people that specialize with first home buyers, and that feeds into preparation, because we've learned what the finance team needs in order to be prepared so that when the loan application goes in, it gets approved. So preparation and a good team around you.
What are some of the grants and support that's available for first home buyers at the moment?
It feels like that's an ever moving set of parameters. But first homeowner grant here in Melbourne or Victoria, $10,000 that the government gives you tax free. So it's effectively more than that if you think about what you have to earn to receive $10,000 from your employer. So there's that.
What are the parameters on getting that grant?
Has to be your first home. So there's a fair bit of hearsay out there. We get a number of people that speak to us saying, I understand if I haven't had property for 10 years, for example, I'm entitled to the first homeowner grant again. That's not the case. If you've ever owned a property, you won't be entitled to the first homeowner grant. You are entitled to some of the other benefits. It has to be your first home. You have to...
Price cap?
$750,000 for the first homeowner grant, which... there's certainly an argument that that's not really kept or keeping pace with property prices. Some of the other benefits that are available, they've shifted these price points to $950,000 for one of the other benefits, which we're going to get to, which is the lender's mortgage insurance waiver. But if that's up at $950,000, first homeowner grant still at $750,000, it feels like there needs to be a bit of a catch up from the first homeowner grant.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and it kind of annoys me. It's a little bit like politicians politicking, where they're like, "Oh, we've got a first homeowners grant," but it's like, yeah, you can't get the first homeowner grant unless you're going into a property, the price point of which almost doesn't exist anymore. So it's a little bit of a furphy where they're pretending to help, but they're really not helping at all. I also, the Victorian government, it would be great if they not only looked at the price cap for that grant and made that aligned with the federal cap at 950. The other thing that would be great, in Victoria, it's 10 grand, which sure, it's helpful, but in the scheme of like a $900,000 property, $10,000 really isn't that much. Where if you have a look at Queensland, their first homeowners grant is 30 grand, which is significant. But even when you look at Queensland, it's the same issue there, where, minimum chips for a property in Queensland, it is quickly approaching $1 million. And they're still sitting there at, I believe they're at a 750 price cap on your first homeowners grant. And I don't know any $750,000 properties up there. So the same thing where politicians are going, we've got all of this support for first home buyers, but it's really just a soundbite. In the real world, it means nothing because no one can get it because the properties aren't worth that much.
If you had to add another layer onto that, it's the new Help to Buy scheme, which may have been one of your next questions. I don't know, but that's another. And I said when the parameters are moving around the grants, the schemes, the benefits that are available. So the Help to Buy scheme is where the government will take on a portion of the property. For what we do, which is new builds, they'll take on up to 40% of the value of the property as an equity share. So they'll pay that part of the mortgage, but the cap on that is not 750.
Let's just clarify there, because you've said they'll pay that part of the mortgage. They won't pay that part of the mortgage. Actually, I'll take that back. They kind of do. Yes. Sorry. Carry on, sir.
So there's no $750,000 cap on that.
Yep.
Right. Which, again, I was thinking about this over the weekend, and, still a relatively new scheme. We're all getting used to it. But if there's no cap on that, and a lot of times we see prices rising to the level of what these caps are. So the lender's mortgage insurance cap, for example, at 950 here. If we get to a point where property isn't going to sit at 750 or less for the first homeowner grant because it's going to rise to these other caps, then not only are we missing out on the first homeowner grant, but you've got all these people that are accessing the Help to Buy scheme that are going to feed the demand, because there's a whole host of people that couldn't previously buy property that now can. So we've got increased demand coming into the bottom of the property market, let's say the lower portion of the triangle, to use that analogy. So you've got naturally people pushing into that segment, people getting to a point where they want to buy, where they've rented for 2 years or 15 years or whatever, somewhere in between, and they're starting to buy. You've got people coming in from overseas, again, into that first home buyer segment. And now you have a whole host of people that couldn't previously buy because their borrowing capacity wasn't high enough, but this scheme enables them to enter the property market, and they're not capped at 750. So the demand is going to increase and increase and increase. So prices are going to go up because there's no more supply, and suddenly that 750 is going to even faster become a thing of the past, and therefore the 10,000 to a degree may as well not exist within, I think, 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. So what is the price cap on the Help to Buy? 950. Good answer.
I wanted to say there isn't one. But no, 950. Yeah.
All right. So explain for the listeners how the Help to Buy scheme works.
Again, these are rough figures, but let's say if you were to buy a $750,000 property, you would need to be, depending on your deposit, you're going to take on roughly a $720,000 mortgage, for example. Now, for a lot of people, that would mean if they've got no kids, they're a couple, and no debts, for example, they'd need an income of about 140,000, roughly 130, 140,000. With the Help to Buy scheme, you no longer need to be able to borrow the $700,000 or $720,000 because the government's going to be covering 40% of the value of the property. So you only need to be able to get the mortgage from the bank. So your borrowing capacity only needs to be 60% of that higher amount.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So the government takes a 40% stake in the property.
Yep.
Which means you only need to service a loan for 60% of the value.
Correct. Yeah. So again, rough figures, but if it was a $750,000 property, you would only need to be able to borrow maybe $430,000 to $450,000.
Yep.
And I've spoken to clients about this over the last few weeks. You know, I could often in a day talk to 10 people, and 8 of them previous to this may not have been in a position to do anything. And now I think maybe 4 or 5 people I speak to are still not eligible to do something, but there's another 30-40% of the people that I speak to who suddenly are in a position to do something, and that feeds demand, which pushes prices up.
Yeah, which is huge. So I know from our marketing and our inquiries that we get through, it's somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 15 people used to service for a loan, which is pretty scary to begin with. And then if you're seeing that jump up to 50% of people, you're right. There's a whole heap of demand which enters the market, which is going to push prices up. So if you're in Melbourne, which is obviously where you operate, if you want to see this happening live in a market that's moving faster than yours, look to Queensland. So if I look at the Queensland market, all of the stimulus for first home buyers used to be to 750,000, and minimum chips for a property was 750,000, give or take, in Queensland. Now the price cap has gone to $1 million for a lot of the first home buyer incentives, and you've seen over it. I mean, it hasn't even been a year. And now minimum chips for a property is already kind of 850, 900. And my prediction is you get to the end of the year, bar something else happening, I think you will see minimum chips for a property in Queensland go to $1 million. Now, you've got that price cap at 950 in Melbourne. And Melbourne, the market isn't as exuberant as it is in Queensland, which means it's going to be slower to move, but we're already starting to see it move. I mean, you were talking about the movement in the southeast, and like I said, the southeast suburbs of Melbourne are the canary in the coal mine, and then it moves from right to left around the bay, and all of the prices start going up. So, you know, if you want a live example of what the future of Melbourne property prices is going to look like, at the moment, you can look to Queensland. And then what I see people say, and I even say it to myself sometimes, I'm like, how the hell can people keep affording these properties? If you need a live example of how that happens, look at Sydney. So Sydney median, I actually don't know off the top of my head median prices, but I think they're 1.4, 1.5. I could be totally wrong, but it's somewhere around that point. So don't fool yourself that they can't keep going up, because there is an Australian city right now where they're continuing to go up.
Yep. Sort of segued around the first home guarantee, which is a waiver, so you don't have to pay lender's mortgage insurance, which is huge. I often think the waiver, so you don't pay lender's mortgage insurance, is bigger than the first homeowner grant. And
explain how it works.
So, without getting into too much detail, if you go to a bank, most banks would try and tell you they have a 20% deposit, meaning that they would happily lend you 80% as long as you've got 20%. With the lender's mortgage insurance waiver, what they're saying is, the banks will lend you more than 80%, but if they do so, they see you as a bigger risk. So let's say you can borrow 95%, which you can as a first home buyer. So you're only putting in 5%. Bank sees you as a bigger risk. Happy to lend you the money, but they will make you pay for them to be insured in case you default on the loan. And that insurance is called lender's mortgage insurance.
How much is it?
On a $750,000 property, it can be $28,000, $29,000. So it's massive. So if I'm in...
So if we're on a $750,000 property, the bank is saying either come up with 150 grand, which is your 20% deposit, which I would put forward with the cost of living, wages, where the world is at the moment in Australia, I think for the majority of Australians, that's impossible.
Agreed.
Yep. So, or you can go a smaller deposit. So, say a 5% deposit, which is 17,500.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go the 5% deposit, then you've got to pay lender's mortgage insurance, which you said 28, 29. But for the purpose of this, call it 30 because it makes my maths easy. So, it means we would need $47,500 in savings, which is better, but still a challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
The government's realised this, that it's, as you said, cost of living's through the roof. It's very difficult for first home buyers. So the government has recognised that. And this scheme is where the government will back the loan. So basically saying to the banks, it's okay. If anything goes wrong, we've got you covered. So the bank goes, okay, well, if the government's backing this loan, we don't need the lender's mortgage insurance. So it saves the first home buyer that $30,000 to keep the math simple.
So instead of the bank going and getting insurance and making you pay for their insurance, which is all sorts of wrong, the government will back that 20% portion, which means you don't have to come up with that 30 grand. So instead of needing 47,500, now you just need 17.5.
Correct.
Which is your 5%.
Correct.
Which is a very realistic number to come up with.
Yes. Yeah. It's big. Like in my head, I often talk to clients about this. Do I want the first homeowner grant? Yeah, of course I do. But if I had to choose between being given $10,000 or saving $30,000, I'm going to take the saving of the $30,000. And as prices go up, unless the government comes to the party and increases the $750,000 for the first homeowner grant, I think we're going to be in a world where, hey, let's take the benefit we can get, which is the lender's mortgage insurance, even if we have to forego the first homeowner grant. And then there's a stamp duty concession as well.
So I think the benefit of that scheme over your Help to Buy scheme. So your Help to Buy is great because it helps with servicing, where you service for a smaller loan, you have a smaller mortgage repayment. The downside is the government owns 40% of your property. So, which also means they own 40% of the upside as well. So if your property goes up in value and you sell it, you've got to pay out their 40% portion. So I think the benefit of the LMI waiver program is you own 100% of your property. So whilst you need to make repayments on the full loan amount rather than the 60%, you also get 100% of the upside, which is significant as we've seen in the property market. What kind of emotional patterns do you see in first home buyers when you talk to them?
Excitement, fear in almost a cyclical fashion. I talk to clients a lot when I meet them about they are going to go on an emotional roller coaster. Often they, when we're sat there in a display home of what a house will feel like for them, their emotions are running high and they're excited, understandably so. They're seeing a path to actually having a home, whereas often before we sit down, it feels like a bit of a pipe dream to them, or they've been knocked back over and over again before. So as it starts to take shape and become a reality, there's this huge level of excitement. And then there is the roller coaster.
So just on that, I know that's something that I saw with clients quite a bit, is when you first meet them, they want it to be true, but they don't believe it can be true. So it's almost like you meet people and there's kind of this air of distrust to begin with, a little bit standoffish, where they're like, really, you can get us into a house? And then as we kind of map out the path, I agree with you that excitement level goes up, where they're like, holy shit, this could actually be a possibility. I think one of the things that I notice there is, and I say this to myself quite often, excitement and fear, they feel exactly the same. Like you can't distinguish between them. To me anyway, it's really just the words you put around it, because they feel the same. And so when you're saying people oscillate between excitement and fear, I think really it's just people's perception of exactly the same emotion changes.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've not thought about it from that perspective, but yeah, from fear and excitement, two sides of the same coin maybe, or the same thing. But yeah, so going back to the roller coaster thing. So we have people who are hugely excited, and as I said, they should be. They're going to get out of the rent trap. They're going to break whatever cycle they've been in. And a lot of people I speak to have tried before, and for whatever reason, it hasn't worked out. But then inevitably, there's also moments of self-doubt. You know me for a decade, so you know about the fact that I ride that roller coaster sometimes myself with different aspects of life. I think it's natural for people to do so. But there's that, the excitement and then an element of fear. So I often say to clients, look, along this journey there were going to be so many questions, so many moments when you're nervous or worried or whatever. Please don't lie there at night staring at the ceiling with questions, because you focus on what could go wrong and on all of those issues. So I literally say to them, when you're having those moments, just text me. It doesn't matter what time, day or night it is. If I'm asleep, I won't answer, but I'll get back to you the following day, because almost always there is a simple answer to the questions that they're fixating on. And that's where we're here. And I say to them, look, I'm not always going to have the answer straight away, but I'll go to Lee, I'll go to Aaron, I'll go to one of the finance team, and pretty quickly we're going to have an answer to you, and you'll realize what you were worried about wasn't worth worrying about. And I hope that leads them to have those conversations with me when they are feeling doubtful. And the other one I say is, look, just focus on the big picture. The end goal is you want your own home. So if there are little undulations of emotion along the way, focus on that, and then you'll stop the up and down and start focusing just on that's the goal. And future stepping it as well. If you don't do this and you keep renting, what does that look like in 10 years? You touched on it before, property prices going up. If something's $750 today, everyone talks about property prices doubling over a 10-year period. Well, let's be conservative. Let's say it doesn't double. But in 10 years, if that $750,000 property is worth 1.2 or 1.3 and you're still renting, you've got to find a way to take on a $1.1, $1.2 million mortgage. Help to Buy scheme's good, but that may not be there in another year, and it isn't even going to help at that point. It will help for some people, but it's not going to have the same impact that it has today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point around the Help to Buy, because there's 10,000 spots, and there were so many inquiries that CBA said, we're not doing any more pre-approvals for this.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it is going to cost the government an absolute bomb to do it. Like, it is not a cheap program. Right. So the odds of them trying to cost cut when they've got such a huge budget deficit, I mean, just turn on the news, you're going to hear about it. The odds of them cutting a program which costs so much money, potentially quite high.
Yeah. I mean, the payoff's there long run, when people sell these properties, but that's a long time to be waiting, because a lot of these people will live in these properties for 10, 20 years, maybe their whole lives.
Yeah, it doesn't work well with the 3-year election cycle.
Quite, yeah.
All right, Hindy, let's wrap this thing up. If you could give one piece of advice to a person looking to get into their own home, what would you give them?
Seek guidance. Seek guidance from people that you feel comfortable with and trust. I've hark back to buying investment properties, trying to do it myself, buying apartments, doing the wrong thing. Self-taught's great in a way in that you feel like you've done it all yourself. But if I could go back and get some decent mentoring and decent guidance at that point, we'd probably be ready to retire right now. Now, over time, we've learned from that. But I think if you can get guidance and mentoring without slipping into some of those pitfalls along the way, then you're going to push yourself forward a lot quicker. So where we would fit into that would be helping them navigate, as I've said before, navigate this process that can seem scary, can seem intimidating. There's a lot to do between deciding you want a home and walking through the front door with your keys for the first time, particularly, with the new builds, etc. But if you're getting good guidance, good preparation, good finance team around you as well, then that goal becomes a reality. And then hopefully for our clients, that's them achieving their dream, which is home ownership.
Do you remember Daryl?
Yes.
So Daryl was a guest on the podcast. So Daryl works for high-end real estate agency up in the Gold Coast. So, they're selling properties worth 10, 20 million, whatever it is. So very, very high-end properties. And I asked him a similar question in the podcast, and he gave me the most interesting answer, which has always stuck with me. And he said, so Daryl's background is he came from commission housing in Ireland.
Yep.
So, and then has worked his way up. He's doing quite well now. But he said his mentality and what he was taught by his parents was you get in there and you do it yourself. You work it out for yourself. And he said the biggest thing that he'd discovered working with these ultra high net worth individuals is none of them do anything themselves. So they go, I need to buy a property. I know nothing about property. Who knows a lot about property? Get them to do it for me. And it was a really important point and you know, adds weight to what you're saying there, is you don't need to work everything out. Someone else has already worked this out. You just need to find the right person to ask for help.
Yep.
Love it, Hindy. Thanks very much for coming in. Great to chat.
Thank you.